The phone screen glowed cold in my trembling hands, and I read the words again, certain I'd misunderstood. We're moving to Oregon. Fresh start for our family. Don't follow us, Mom. Don't visit until we say it's okay. We need space. Bye. Just like that. 37 words to erase 71 years of love, sacrifice, and devotion. No phone call. No explanation. Just a text message delivered on a Tuesday morning while I was folding the little shirts and dresses I'd washed for my grandchildren the day before. I'm going to tell you something true, and I hope you'll stay with me through all of it because this story, my story, it matters. Not because I'm special, but because maybe somewhere out there, someone else is sitting in their kitchen at dawn, staring at their phone, wondering how the child they raised could become so cold. And maybe, just maybe, they need to know they're not alone in this particular kind of heartbreak. My name is Margaret, though my grandchildren, oh, how I loved hearing them say it. They called me Grammy. I'm 71 years old now. Though some days I feel ancient and other days I feel like that young mother I was decades ago, full of hope and energy and dreams for my boy, my son Daniel. The child I raised alone after his father passed when Daniel was only 3. The baby I rocked through nightmares and fevers. The teenager I worked 2 jobs to put through college. The grown man I supported through his own struggles with marriage and fatherhood. I thought I'd done everything right. I truly did. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed, or perhaps the signs I chose not to see because seeing them would have meant acknowledging something too painful to bear. But that Tuesday morning, sitting at my small kitchen table with the morning light streaming through the lace curtains I'd hung 40 years ago, I couldn't see anything except those words on that cold, bright screen. Let me take you back a bit, so you understand how we got here. Understanding doesn't make it hurt less, but it makes the hurt make sense, if that distinction matters to you the way it matters to me. Daniel met Caroline when he was 28, at some work conference in Atlanta. She was pretty and ambitious, the kind of woman who wore sharp blazers and kept her calendar color-coded. I remember meeting her for the first time. How she shook my hand instead of hugging me. How her smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at my modest home. But Daniel loved her, or said he did, and I wanted my son to be happy. So I welcomed her. I tried. They married quickly, within a year, and I helped where I could. I paid for the flowers at their wedding because Caroline's parents, well, they had their own ideas about things and not much interest in contributing. I hemmed her dress myself, sitting up late with my old sewing machine, making sure every stitch was perfect. She thanked me politely, the way you might thank a store clerk for bagging your groceries. The grandchildren came next. First Emma, with her father's dark eyes and her grandmother's, my curly hair. Then 2 years later, little James, all energy and laughter and sticky hands that reached for me every time I walked through their door. Oh, how I loved those babies. Love them still. With an ache that lives somewhere deep in my chest, just beneath my ribs. I became the reliable one. The one they called when they needed someone to watch the kids so they could have date night. The one who picked up Emma from preschool every Tuesday and Thursday, because Caroline's meetings ran late. The one who kept James overnight when he had that terrible flu last winter, rocking him through the fever while his parents slept soundly in their own bed 20 minutes away. I told myself it was normal. That this was what grandmothers did. That my involvement was wanted, needed, appreciated. And maybe at first it was. But somewhere along the way, appreciation became expectation. And expectation became entitlement. And I was too grateful to be needed to notice the shift. I started keeping the children 3, sometimes 4 days a week. I knew their routines better than their own parents did. I knew that Emma liked her sandwiches cut in triangles and James wouldn't eat green beans unless they had butter and a little salt. I knew their favorite bedtime stories by heart. I kept a drawer full of their clothes at my house, a basket of their toys in my living room, their favorite snacks in my pantry. My days revolved around them. I planned my life, my entire life, around their schedules. Doctor's appointments for my aging body got postponed because Emma had ballet. My own friends, the few I had left, stopped calling because I was always busy with the grandchildren. My late husband's sister, my dear friend Ruth, she'd invite me for coffee and I'd say no. I had to watch the kids. Always the kids. Always Daniel's family. I gave them money too. Not that they asked directly, not at first. But Daniel would mention, casual like, that things were tight that month, that Caroline's car needed repairs they hadn't budgeted for, that Emma's school was doing some special program that cost extra, and I'd write a check, pulling from my modest savings, from the Social Security I lived on, from the small life insurance policy my husband left me that was supposed to see me through my final years. I told myself it was temporary, that they'd pay me back, that this was what family did for each other. They never paid me back. And I never asked them to, because asking felt like admitting I expected something in return for love. And wasn't love supposed to be free? The thing about being slowly taken advantage of is that you don't realize it's happening until you're so deep in the pattern that climbing out feels impossible. Each small request seems reasonable on its own. Each favor feels like a choice. But when you step back, if you ever get the chance to step back, you see the whole picture, and the picture is you, diminished and exhausted and somehow convinced you should be grateful for the opportunity to give more. Last Christmas, I hosted dinner at my house like always. I cooked for 3 days straight, making all of Daniel's favorites, Caroline's special dietary restrictions, the elaborate desserts the children loved. My back ached from standing so long. My hands, arthritic now in the cold weather, cramped from all the chopping and stirring. But I smiled through it because I loved seeing them gathered around my table, loved the sound of the children's laughter filling my small home. They stayed for 3 hours. Caroline spent most of it on her phone. Daniel fell asleep on my couch after eating. The children played nicely at least, but when it was time to leave, no one helped me clean up. No one offered to take the leftovers I'd carefully packed. Caroline mentioned they had to get home early because they had plans the next day, plans I hadn't been invited to. I washed dishes alone until nearly midnight, my feet swollen, my heart heavy with a loneliness I couldn't quite name. In January, I noticed Daniel and Caroline seemed distant. They didn't call as often. When I'd text to ask about keeping the children, the responses came slower, shorter. Maybe next week, Caroline would say. We're figuring some things out. I tried not to worry. I told myself they were just busy, that life got hectic. But mothers know. We feel the shift in our children's hearts the way sailors feel storms coming. Then came February. Early February, when winter felt endless and gray. When my bones ached with cold and loneliness both. I texted Daniel on a Sunday, asking if I could take the children to the museum on Tuesday. We'd been planning it for weeks. Emma had been learning about dinosaurs, and was so excited. He didn't respond for 2 days. When he finally did, it was brief. Mom, actually Caroline and I need to talk to you. Can we stop by Thursday? My heart lifted. A visit. Time with them. Maybe they needed help with something. Maybe they wanted me to watch the kids for a weekend trip. I cleaned my house top to bottom. I baked Daniel's favorite cookies. I waited. They didn't come Thursday. No call, no explanation. Just silence. And then the following Tuesday, that text. That cold, final, devastating text. We're moving to Oregon. Fresh start for our family. Don't follow us, Mom. Don't visit until we say it's okay. We need space. Bye. I sat there for what must have been an hour, maybe more, just staring at those words. The morning grew bright around me. The neighbors left for work, their car doors slamming in the distance. A bird sang outside my window, oblivious to the way my world had just ended. My son was leaving, taking my grandchildren across the country, telling me, not asking, telling, not to follow, not to visit, not to be part of their lives anymore. And I hadn't even done anything wrong. Or had I? That was the question that started gnawing at me immediately, the cruel voice that whispers in every mother's ear when her child rejects her. What did I do? What could I have done differently? Was I too much? Too needy? Too present? I wanted to call him. My fingers hovered over his name in my contacts a dozen times that day. I wanted to beg, to ask for an explanation, to demand to see my grandchildren one last time before they disappeared into whatever new life they'd decided I wasn't part of. But something stopped me. Pride maybe. Or dignity. Or perhaps just the bone-deep exhaustion of a woman who'd given everything and realized, too late, that everything was never going to be enough. So I didn't call. I didn't text back. I didn't drive to their house and pound on the door demanding answers. I just sat in my kitchen, in the growing cold, and let my heart break in silence. The days after that text blurred together in a haze of grief so thick, I could barely breathe through it. I'd wake each morning forgetting for just a moment. That blessed moment between sleep and consciousness when the world still made sense. And then reality would crash down and I'd remember. They were leaving. They were gone really, even if they hadn't physically moved yet. They'd already left me behind in every way that mattered. I didn't tell anyone at first. What would I say? My son is moving across the country and told me not to follow? The shame of it felt too heavy to speak aloud. Shame, isn't that strange? I was the one being abandoned, yet I felt ashamed, as if I'd failed some fundamental test of motherhood. As if good mothers didn't get discarded like this. Ruth called on Wednesday, 3 days after the text. Sweet Ruth, who'd known me since Daniel was in diapers, who'd held my hand at my husband's funeral, who'd seen me through every hard season of my life. I almost didn't answer, but loneliness won out over pride. She knew something was wrong immediately. She always could read my voice. I told her everything, the words tumbling out between tears I'd been holding back for days. She was quiet for a long moment after I finished, and then she said something I'll never forget. She said my son had become a stranger wearing Daniel's face, that the boy I'd raised was still in there somewhere, but he'd lost his way. She said it wasn't my fault. I wanted to believe her. I'm still not sure I do. The next week passed in strange slow motion. I kept expecting Daniel to call, to explain, to apologize, to tell me it was all a misunderstanding. I rehearsed conversations in my head, imagined different ways it might go. Maybe he'd been under stress. Maybe Caroline had pushed this decision. Maybe if I just waited patiently, he'd come to his senses. He didn't call. I learned through a neighbor that they'd put their house up for sale. The neighbor mentioned it casually at the grocery store, said she'd seen the realtor's sign go up. Asked if I was excited about wherever they were moving. I smiled and nodded and said something vague, then went home and cried into my pillow until my head pounded. They were really doing this. Really leaving. And they hadn't even told me when. I found myself driving past their house sometimes, not stopping, just driving by like some pathetic stalker. I'd see lights on in the windows, shadows moving behind curtains. My grandchildren were in there living their lives, probably being told Grammy was too busy to visit, or maybe not being told about me at all anymore. That thought hurt worst of all. That I might simply cease to exist in their world, become a vague memory that faded with time. Emma would forget the way I braided her hair. James would forget the silly songs I sang while making breakfast. They'd grow up without me, and one day I'd just be an old woman they used to know, if they remembered me at all. 2 weeks after the text, I saw Caroline at Target. My heart seized in my chest. I almost turned around, almost fled, but she'd already seen me. She didn't approach. She just gave me this tight little smile and a small wave, then turned down another aisle. Like I was an acquaintance. Like I hadn't spent countless hours caring for her children while she built her career. Like I was nothing. I abandoned my shopping cart and left. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this, suspended in this awful limbo, waiting for a call that wouldn't come, hoping for a reconciliation they clearly didn't want. I had to accept it. They were leaving, and they didn't want me in their lives, and no amount of hoping or hurting was going to change that. But accepting it didn't mean I had to disappear quietly. Didn't mean I had to let them forget what they were leaving behind. I got up and turned on the light in my spare room. The room that had become half storage, half shrine to my grandchildren. Their drawings covered one wall, stuck up with tape over the years. Crayon masterpieces of stick figure families, always with Grammy front and center. Usually bigger than everyone else because to them, I was bigger. I was important. I was loved. I took them down carefully, one by one, my hands shaking. There must have been 50 drawings, maybe more. Every birthday card they'd made me, every Mother's Day craft from school that they'd insisted was for me because I was like a mom but better. In my closet, I found the box of photographs I'd been collecting since Emma was born. Pictures I'd taken and had printed out. I'm old-fashioned that way. Never trusted keeping everything on phones that could break or get lost. There was Emma as a newborn, sleeping in my arms at the hospital. James taking his first steps in my living room. Both of them covered in flour, helping me bake cookies. Emma missing her front teeth, grinning at the camera. James dressed as a superhero for Halloween, his cape made from one of my old scarves. In every photo they were happy. Really truly happy. The kind of happiness you can't fake, especially in children. I found other things too. A lock of hair from Emma's first haircut, saved in a tiny envelope. James's first lost tooth, which he'd insisted I keep because the tooth fairy had already taken it once, and he wanted Grammy to have it forever. Birthday cards from Daniel over the years, back when he still wrote personal messages instead of just signing his name. Even older things, Daniel's baby blanket, worn soft from use, the one I'd wrapped him in every night of his infancy. His first report card, all A's, with the teacher's note saying what a sweet boy he was. Pictures of him as a child, before he grew hard and distant, when he still looked at me with unconditional love in his eyes. These were the pieces of our history, the tangible proof that we'd been a family, that love had existed here, that I wasn't imagining the closeness we'd once shared. I spread everything out on my bed and just looked at it all. This was my life. These scraps of paper and faded photographs. These little treasures I'd hoarded like a dragon hoards gold. To anyone else, they might seem like junk. To me, they were everything. And I realized they needed to see this. Daniel and Caroline needed to understand what they were throwing away. Not me, they'd already made clear they didn't want me. But this history, these memories, the evidence of love that had been poured out for years, freely given, never counted or measured until now when it was too late. I started gathering things carefully, methodically. Not everything. Some pieces were mine to keep, my private treasures for the lonely years ahead. But enough. Enough to make them remember. Enough to make them feel something. Even if that something was just regret. The drawings went into a large manila envelope. The photographs, I selected carefully. Ones that showed the children's joy, their comfort in my home, their bond with me. Nothing accusatory. Nothing that said, look what you're taking from me. Just simple documentation of love. I found a small wooden box my husband had made years ago, beautiful cedar with brass hinges. In it, I placed the locks of hair, the tiny tooth, a few other small mementos. Things that couldn't be replaced or recreated. Things that mattered. And then I sat down to write a letter. Just one letter, because too many words would sound like begging, and I was done begging. I was done making myself small in the hopes they'd find room for me. The letter took me 3 tries. The first was too angry. The second too pleading. The third finally felt right. Simple. Honest. Dignified. I didn't address it to anyone specific. I didn't sign my name. I just wrote what needed to be said. These are the pieces of us you left behind. Every drawing, every photo, every small treasure. They're yours now. I kept them safe all these years, thinking we'd look at them together someday. That I'd tell the stories behind each one. That chance is gone now, but the memories remain. If you ever miss them, if you ever wonder what was lost, you know where I am. I'll be here, in the same house at the same number. Waiting, not because I expect you to return, but because this is my home. And I won't be driven from it by absence. The door is always open. But I won't chase you through it. That choice is yours alone. I read it over twice, then folded it carefully and placed it on top of everything else. Then I packed it all into a sturdy box, wrapped it in brown paper, and addressed it to their new house in Oregon. I'd found the address online. It wasn't hard. They'd posted about it on social media. Excited announcements about their new adventure that I saw by accident. Each word another small knife to my heart. I calculated the timing carefully. I wanted it to arrive on moving day. Not before, when they could set it aside and forget about it in the chaos. Not after, when they'd already settled in. But right in the middle, when boxes were everywhere and their whole world was in upheaval. When they'd be vulnerable to memory, to emotion, to second thoughts. I took the package to the post office on a gray Thursday morning, paid for expedited shipping, and watched the postal worker take it away. Then I went home to wait. The hardest part about letting someone go isn't the actual goodbye. It's all the little goodbyes that come after. The ones you didn't prepare for. The ones that ambush you when you're just trying to get through the day. I said goodbye to my Tuesday morning routine first. For 3 years, I'd picked up Emma from preschool every Tuesday at 11:30. I knew exactly how long it took to drive there, where to park, which door she'd come bursting through with her little backpack bouncing. That first Tuesday after sending the package, I woke up at my usual time, and for a moment forgot. My body remembered even if my mind tried not to. I was halfway through my coffee before I realized I had nowhere to go, no one to pick up, no little hand to hold on the walk back to the car. I sat at my kitchen table and cried into my lukewarm coffee. Then I poured it out, made fresh, and decided I had to find a way to fill these empty spaces before they swallowed me whole. Ruth suggested I volunteer somewhere. The library, maybe, or the community center. Places that needed grandmotherly types to read stories or help with craft projects. I knew she meant well, but the thought of being around other people's grandchildren, other people's happy families, felt like pressing on a bruise just to remember it hurt. Instead, I started walking. Every morning, rain or shine, I'd bundle up and walk through my neighborhood. The same streets I'd walked for 40 years. I'd watch other people's lives through windows. Dinner tables being set, children doing homework, families existing in the casual comfort of togetherness. I was a ghost haunting my own neighborhood, invisible and insubstantial. The package would arrive in 6 days. I'd timed it perfectly, checked the tracking number obsessively. It was somewhere in transit, making its way across the country, carrying all those memories toward people who might not want them. I wondered what I expected to happen. Did I think Daniel would call immediately, sobbing apologies? Did I imagine Caroline having some grand epiphany about the grandmother they were discarding? Did I hope my grandchildren would demand to see me? Their tears melting their parents' cold hearts? Maybe. Probably. I'm not proud of it, but yes, some desperate part of me hoped for a movie moment. A dramatic reconciliation. Proof that love could still matter more than convenience. But deeper down, beneath the hope, I think I knew better. I think I understood that the package wasn't really about bringing them back. It was about letting them go with the truth laid bare between us. It was about refusing to disappear quietly, to be erased without witness. It was about saying, I was here. I mattered. You cannot rewrite this history to exclude me. Because here is the proof, tangible and undeniable, of what we were. The days crawled by. I tried to keep busy. I deep cleaned my house, scrubbing corners that hadn't been touched in years. I organized closets, threw away old clothes, donated books I'd never read again. I was trying to make myself smaller, I think, to prepare for a life that would require less space now that I had fewer people to fill it. I found more reminders everywhere. A sippy cup in the back of my kitchen cabinet. A board book wedged behind the couch cushions. Emma's hairbrush on my bathroom counter, still tangled with her dark curls. Each discovery was a small violence, a reminder of absence. I kept them all, put them in a box in the spare room, the room that would no longer be the grandchildren's room. I couldn't bring myself to pack away everything, not yet. Maybe not ever. Maybe this was who I'd become, a woman living in a museum of her own loss. On the 4th day of waiting, I ran into someone from Daniel's high school at the grocery store. Mrs. Chun, who'd been his English teacher, who'd always said such kind things about him at parent-teacher conferences. She asked how he was doing, where he'd ended up, whether I saw my grandchildren often. I lied. I smiled and said everyone was well, that they were busy but happy, that we saw each other regularly. The lies came easily, surprisingly so. It was easier than explaining the truth. Easier than watching her face shift from pleasant interest to pity. But the lies left a bitter taste. I'd become someone who pretended. Someone who protected the reputation of people who'd abandoned her. Why? What did I owe them? What did I owe Daniel, who couldn't even call his mother, who couldn't give me the basic dignity of a real goodbye? Nothing. I owed them nothing. Yet I kept their secrets anyway, because airing them publicly felt like admitting defeat. Like saying, look what my life has become. Look how little I matter. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old photo albums, the ones from when Daniel was young, and I looked at them, really looked at them, not through the soft focus of maternal nostalgia but with clearer, harder eyes. There we were at the park, Daniel maybe 5 years old, grinning toothlessly at the camera. I remembered that day. I'd worked a double shift the night before, was exhausted to my bones, but he'd wanted to go to the park so badly. So we went. I pushed him on the swings until my arms ached. We fed the ducks. We got ice cream even though I'd been saving that money for his new shoes. He'd been happy that day. Really happy. I could see it in the photo, in the uncomplicated joy on his small face. When had that changed? When did my love become a burden instead of a blessing? Or had I been fooling myself all along, mistaking his need for my love, confusing his dependence for devotion? There were photos of birthdays, Christmases, graduations. In every single one, I was there. Behind the camera usually, but present always. The constant. The reliable one. The one who showed up. And now here I was, being discarded for the crime of showing up too much, of caring too deeply, of structuring my entire existence around people who found my existence inconvenient. The unfairness of it burned in my chest like acid. But beneath the anger was something else, something I was almost afraid to acknowledge. A tiny seed of relief. Because if they were really gone, if they truly didn't want me anymore, then maybe, just maybe, I could stop trying so hard. Stop making myself small and convenient. Stop apologizing for taking up space in my own life. Maybe I could just be Margaret again. Not Daniel's mother. Not Grammy. Just myself, whoever that was after all these years of being defined by other people's needs. The thought felt like betrayal and liberation all at once. On the 6th day, moving day, I woke before dawn. I couldn't help it. Somewhere across the country, my son was packing his family into a car or maybe a moving truck, driving away from the only home my grandchildren had ever known, heading toward a future that didn't include me. And sometime that day, a package would arrive. A doorbell would ring. Someone would open a box and find the weight of memory inside. I imagined it 100 different ways. Emma finding the drawings, remembering the afternoons we'd spent together with crayons and construction paper. James holding that tiny tooth, confused about why Grammy had sent it. Daniel seeing his baby blanket, the one I'd kept all these years, and maybe, feeling something crack in that hard shell he'd built around his heart. Or maybe none of that would happen. Maybe they'd glance at it briefly and pack it away. One more box among many, quickly forgotten in the excitement of new rooms and new neighbors and new lives that had no space for old women with wrinkled hands and breaking hearts. I didn't know which scenario I feared more. I spent the day in a strange state of suspended animation. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus on the television or a book. I just moved through my house, touching things, remembering. This was my life now. This quiet house, these empty rooms, this endless waiting for a phone that probably wouldn't ring. By evening, I was exhausted from doing nothing. I made myself a simple dinner, soup from a can, crackers, tea, and sat at my small kitchen table. The same table where I'd read that awful text. The same table where I'd folded countless loads of small clothes. The same table where I'd sat thousands of times over the years, in joy and sorrow, in youth and now in age. The same table where I'd finally have to learn to be alone. My phone sat next to my bowl, silent and dark. I picked it up once, twice, a dozen times. Checked for messages that hadn't come. Put it down. Picked it up again. Nothing. The package had been delivered. The tracking confirmed it. Signed for by someone named Caroline at 2:17 in the afternoon, Pacific time. 5:17 my time. 3 hours ago. 3 hours and silence. I washed my dishes slowly, methodically. Dried them. Put them away. I wiped down the counters. Swept the floor. Turned off the lights one by one. And still the phone didn't ring. I went to bed early, too tired to stay awake, too wired to sleep. I lay in the darkness, listening to my house settle around me, and wondered if this was how it would be from now on. This waiting. This silence. This slow fade into irrelevance. Just before midnight, my phone finally lit up. My hand shook so badly, I almost dropped the phone reaching for it. The screen glowed in the darkness, and there it was, Daniel's name. After weeks of silence, after that cold text, after everything, he was calling. I let it ring twice more while my heart hammered against my ribs. Part of me wanted to answer immediately, to hear his voice, to have whatever connection he was offering. Another part wanted to let it go to voicemail, to make him wait the way he'd made me wait, to give him just a taste of what abandonment felt like. But I've never been good at playing games, not even when I should be. I answered. His voice came through rough and thick, like he'd been crying. He said my name, just Mom, nothing else. And then silence. Long, heavy silence where I could hear him breathing. Could almost feel him gathering courage or composure or whatever it was he needed to say what came next. He told me they'd received the package. That Emma had opened it first, thinking it was something for her, some toy or game. That she'd pulled out the drawings and started crying, asking where Grammy was, why Grammy had sent these, when she could see me. That James had found his baby tooth and gotten confused because wasn't it supposed to be from the tooth fairy, and why did Grammy have it? And could they call me right now, please, right now? Caroline had panicked, Daniel said. She'd tried to distract the children, tried to explain it away. But then she'd looked through the rest of the package. Seen all those photos. All those moments she'd been too busy or too distracted to notice happening. All that history she'd convinced herself didn't matter, couldn't matter, because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging what they were doing to me. The wooden box had broken her, Daniel said. The little treasures inside, the physical pieces of his children's childhood that I'd preserved because I thought someone should, because I believed these small things mattered. Caroline had sat on the floor surrounded by moving boxes and cried. Really cried, maybe for the first time since they'd decided to cut me out of their lives. And Daniel, my son, my boy, he'd read the letter. Read it multiple times, he said. Kept coming back to that line about the door always being open but me not chasing them through it. That's when it hit him, he said. That's when he realized what he'd done. He was sorry. So sorry. He didn't know what he'd been thinking. The move had been Caroline's idea initially, yes, but he'd agreed to it. Agreed to the distance. Agreed to the fresh start that apparently required erasing me. He'd been overwhelmed, stressed with work, tired of feeling like he was failing somehow, and it had been easier to blame me for being too present than to fix whatever was actually broken in his life. He wanted to make it right. They all did. Could they come visit? Could they drive down before the move was final? The kids were asking for me, begging really, and he couldn't bear to see them so upset. Please, Mom. Please. I listened to all of this in the darkness of my bedroom, clutching the phone, feeling emotions crash over me in waves too complicated to name. Relief that he'd called. Anger that it took a package to make him see me as human. Grief that my grandchildren were hurting. Fury that he thought sorry and a phone call could fix weeks of cruelty. Love still stubborn and aching. And underneath it all, exhaustion so deep it felt like drowning. When he finally stopped talking, stopped making his case, I spoke for the first time since answering. My voice came out steadier than I felt, quiet but firm. I told him no. The word hung between us like something solid. I could hear his shock in the silence that followed, could almost see his face, confused and hurt because he wasn't used to me saying no, wasn't used to me having boundaries at all. I explained calmly, carefully, that sorry wasn't enough. That one phone call prompted by guilt and crying children wasn't the same as actually understanding what he'd done. That I loved him and I loved his children desperately, but I wouldn't be pulled back into their lives just to be convenient again, just to soothe their temporary guilt before they decided once more that I was too much trouble. He tried to interrupt, to protest, to promise it would be different. I didn't let him. I told him they were moving in 2 days, that they'd made their choice, and they needed to live with it for a while. Actually live with it. Let it settle in their bones the way it had settled in mine. Let the children miss me. Let Caroline face what she'd advocated for. Let him sit with the consequences of treating his mother like disposable help. I told him the door was open, just like the letter said. But they had to walk through it properly, with intention and humility and real change. Not just emotional reaction to a box of memories. They had to want me in their lives, truly want me, not just need something from me. I told him I loved him, that I'd always love him, that I'd always love those babies. But that love didn't mean letting myself be hurt over and over again. And then, before he could argue more, before my resolve could weaken, I said goodnight and ended the call. I sat in the dark for a long time after that, shaking, adrenaline coursing through me. I'd never done anything like that before. Never set a boundary so firmly with Daniel. Never refused him anything he asked for. It felt terrifying and necessary and completely foreign, like speaking a language I'd never learned but somehow understood. The phone rang again. I didn't answer. It rang 4 more times over the next hour. Each time, I let it go to voicemail. I didn't listen to the messages. Not that night. Maybe not ever. Eventually, texts started coming instead. Long paragraphs from Daniel, shorter ones from Caroline. All saying variations of the same things. They were sorry, they'd made a terrible mistake, they wanted to fix this, please just let them try. I turned off my phone and plugged it in across the room where I couldn't reach it without getting out of bed. Then I pulled my blankets up to my chin and stared at the ceiling, feeling more awake than I'd felt in weeks despite the late hour. Something had shifted inside me. Some fundamental thing had broken and reformed in a different shape. I'd spent so much of my life being accommodating, being available, being whatever other people needed me to be. Soft grandma. Reliable mom. The one who never complained, never made demands, never insisted on being treated with basic respect. That version of me had been easy to discard. Of course she had. She'd never asked for anything, never stood up for herself, never suggested she might have needs and feelings that mattered just as much as everyone else's. But this version, the one who'd said no, who'd set terms, who'd insisted on dignity, she was harder to dismiss. Harder to take for granted. Maybe even harder to lose, if they truly understood what losing her would mean. I wasn't sure who I was becoming. This new Margaret, with her boundaries and her quiet strength, she felt both empowering and terrifying. Because holding firm meant risking permanent loss. It meant accepting that Daniel might never come back, that I might never see my grandchildren again, that choosing self-respect might cost me the only family I had. But the alternative, going back to how things were, accepting scraps of affection, being grateful for whatever minimal role they deigned to give me, that felt like dying slowly, and I'd rather lose them while standing tall than keep them while on my knees. Sleep came eventually, restless and full of dreams I couldn't quite remember upon waking. When morning light filtered through my curtains, I felt heavy and light simultaneously. Heavy with what I'd done, light from having done it. I turned my phone back on. 17 missed calls. 23 text messages. 2 voicemails. I scrolled through them briefly, not reading in detail. More apologies. More promises. More pleading. And one message that stopped me cold. A video, sent at 6:42 that morning. The thumbnail showed Emma's tear-stained face. I sat on the edge of my bed for 5 full minutes before I found the courage to press play. Emma's voice filled my quiet bedroom, small and broken and so achingly familiar. She was asking why Grammy didn't want to see her anymore, what she'd done wrong, promising to be better if I'd just come back. Behind her, I could hear James crying, Caroline's voice trying to soothe him, Daniel saying something I couldn't quite make out. The video was only 43 seconds long. I watched it 6 times, tears streaming down my face, my heart cracking open fresh each time. This was the cost of boundaries. This was what standing up for myself looked like. My grandchildren crying, confused, hurting. They didn't understand. How could they? They were just babies, innocent victims of their parents' mistakes and my necessary refusal to be victimized again. I wanted to call back. Wanted to say I was coming, that everything would be okay, that Grammy would fix it all like I always did. But I didn't. I saved the video to my phone, then set it aside and went to make my coffee. Some prices have to be paid, even when they break your heart. The days after that video were the hardest of my life, and I've lived through plenty of hard days. Watching your husband die slowly from cancer, that was hard. Raising a child alone on a secretary's salary, that was hard. But this, choosing to stay away from grandchildren who were crying for me, this was a different kind of torture, the kind you inflict on yourself because the alternative is worse. Ruth came over on the 3rd day. She didn't call first, just showed up at my door with a casserole and a determined look that said she wasn't leaving until I ate something and talked to her. She'd always been able to read me, had known without being told that I was struggling, that the silence from my inn meant I was barely holding myself together. I told her everything over lukewarm chicken and rice. About the phone call, the video, the choice I'd made to say no. I expected her to tell me I was being too harsh, that those babies needed their grandmother, that I should forgive and move forward. That's what the old Margaret would have expected, would have believed she deserved to hear. But Ruth surprised me. She set down her fork and took my hand across the table, her grip firm and warm, and she said I'd done the right thing. The hard thing, yes. The painful thing, absolutely. But the right thing. She said you can't build a healthy relationship on a foundation of desperation and guilt, that real love requires respect, and respect requires boundaries. I cried into her shoulder like a child. Cried for what felt like hours. Releasing grief I'd been holding behind a dam of determination. She just held me and let me soak her cardigan with tears, and didn't say a word until I was empty. After she left, I felt lighter. Not happy, not anywhere close to happy. But less alone. Less crazy. Like maybe I wasn't a terrible person for refusing to rush back to people who'd hurt me just because they'd finally noticed the hurt existed. The calls and texts from Daniel slowed after the first week. From several times a day to once a day to every few days. The messages changed tone too. Less desperate apology, more quiet acknowledgement. He told me they'd completed the move. That the kids asked about me constantly. That Caroline had started therapy. Actually started therapy, to work through whatever had made her think cutting me out was acceptable. That he was trying to understand how they'd gotten here, how he'd let it happen. I didn't respond to most of them. When I did, I kept it brief. Told him I was glad they'd arrived safely. That I hoped therapy helped. That I loved them all but needed more time. The words felt formal and distant. Nothing like the warmth I'd once given so freely, but formal and distant felt safer right now than vulnerable and open. I started rebuilding my life in small ways. Joined a book club at the library that Ruth had been pestering me about for years. The women there were mostly my age, some widows, some simply alone, all looking for connection and conversation. We met every other Wednesday, discussed books I only sometimes finished, drank weak coffee from styrofoam cups. It wasn't earth-shattering, but it was something. It was people who saw me as Margaret, not as someone's mother or grandmother, not as a convenient set of hands. I volunteered one morning a week at a local food bank, sorting donations and packing boxes. The work was simple and physical and required enough focus that I couldn't spiral into overthinking. The other volunteers were kind without being intrusive. No one asked about my family. No one knew what I'd lost. I was just another older woman giving her time. And there was freedom in that anonymity. My walks continued, but I changed my route. Instead of haunting my own neighborhood, I drove to a park across town and walked the trails there. Trees and sky and strangers felt easier than the ghosts of Tuesday mornings and school pickup routines. I saw families sometimes, young parents with toddlers, grandparents playing with grandchildren. And it hurt, but it was a cleaner hurt. Distant. Not mine. 6 weeks after they moved, I received a letter in the mail. Not a text, not an email, but an actual handwritten letter on real paper in a real envelope. From Daniel. His handwriting was the same as it had been since high school, neat and slightly slanted, familiar as my own heartbeat. He wrote about Oregon. About their new house, smaller than the old one, with a yard that needed work. About Emma's new school, how she was adjusting slowly, making friends but mentioning me to her teacher so often that there'd been a conference about whether she was dealing with grief. About James starting preschool, how he'd drawn a picture of me on his first day, labeled Grammy far away, in his teacher's handwriting because he couldn't spell yet. He wrote about himself too, more honestly than he'd spoken to me in years. About feeling lost and overwhelmed. About how he'd convinced himself that distance from me would solve problems that actually had nothing to do with me. About realizing too late that I'd been the steady thing in his children's lives, maybe the only steady thing. And that removing that had created a void nothing else could fill. He wrote about Caroline. About how she'd grown up with parents who believed in independence above all else, who'd raised her to see family obligations as weakness, who'd taught her that relying on others meant failure. About how she'd projected that onto our relationship, seen my involvement with the kids as Daniel failing to manage his own family. About how therapy was helping her see that interdependence wasn't weakness, that accepting help wasn't shameful, that she'd broken something valuable by treating it as disposable. The letter was 4 pages long, front and back. At the end he didn't ask me to visit, didn't beg me to call, just said he was sorry, that he was trying to be better, that whenever I was ready, if I ever was, they'd be waiting. He signed it, your son always. And that nearly undid me. I kept that letter on my kitchen table for 3 days, reading it over and over, looking for manipulation, for empty promises, for anything that felt like the old pattern trying to reassert itself. But it felt genuine, humbled, real in a way our relationship hadn't been in years, maybe ever. I thought about my husband then, about what he'd say if he were here. He'd been a quiet man, thoughtful, slow to anger but firm in his convictions. He'd probably tell me that people can change, but only if they want to badly enough. Only if the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of transformation. Had Daniel reached that point? Had Caroline? Or would this new awareness fade once the guilt wore off? Once the novelty of Oregon distracted them? Once they settled into routines that didn't include me and realized life was fine without the inconvenience of a needy mother-in-law? I didn't know. Couldn't know. That was the terrible uncertainty of it all. I had to decide whether to risk my heart again without any guarantee it wouldn't get broken the same way twice. 2 months after the move, Emma had a birthday. Her 7th. I'd been planning it in my head for months before everything fell apart. Had already bought presents I'd hidden in my closet. Had imagined the party I'd help organize, the cake I'd bake. The presents were still in my closet. I looked at them the night before her birthday. A book series she'd been wanting, a craft kit for making friendship bracelets, a framed photo of the two of us from last summer, both of us laughing at something long forgotten. I wrapped them carefully in bright paper, wrote a card that said "Happy birthday to my Emma. Grammy loves you to the moon and back." Put them in a box and shipped them overnight, paying extra to ensure they arrived on her actual birthday. I didn't include a return address. Didn't include my phone number. Just the presents and the card. Proof that I still remembered, still cared, still existed in her world even if she couldn't see me. Daniel texted the next day. A photo of Emma holding the book, wearing the biggest smile I'd seen in months. Just the photo, no words, but it said enough. I saved it to my phone, added it to a growing collection of pictures and videos he'd been sending sporadically. Proof that my grandchildren still existed, still grew and changed, still lived their lives in my absence. It hurt to see them only through screens, but it hurt less than not seeing them at all. That night, I made a decision. Not to rush back, not to forgive too quickly or too completely, but to crack the door open just a little bit wider, to respond when they reached out, to acknowledge their efforts even while maintaining my boundaries. I sent Daniel a text. Just a few words. I'm glad she had a good birthday. Tell her Grammy got her smile in a picture. And it made me happy. His response came immediately. She wants to call you. I stared at those words for a long time. A phone call. With Emma. My heart wanted it desperately, but my head urged caution. One call could so easily become falling back into old patterns, could make them think everything was forgiven and forgotten. But maybe it didn't have to. Maybe I could talk to my granddaughter and still hold my ground. Maybe love and boundaries could coexist. I typed back. Sunday afternoon. 2 o'clock my time. 15 minutes. Just Emma. And then before I could overthink it, I hit send. Sunday came too slowly and too fast all at once. I changed my clothes 3 times that morning, which was ridiculous. Emma wouldn't even see me, it was just a phone call. But I wanted to feel put together. Wanted to approach this conversation from a place of strength rather than the desperate longing that still lived in my chest. At exactly 2 o'clock my phone rang. I let it ring once, twice, steadying my breath, reminding myself of my boundaries. Then I answered. Emma's voice hit me like a physical thing. She said Grammy in that particular way she always had, drawing out the first syllable, and I had to close my eyes against the wave of emotion. She started talking immediately, words tumbling over each other. About her new school, her new room, a friend named Sophie, how Oregon had mountains and rain and everything was different but not bad exactly, just different. I let her talk, drinking in her voice, her energy, her aliveness. She sounded good. Happy even, underneath the excitement of finally getting to talk to me. That realization hurt and healed simultaneously. They were okay without me, which meant I'd been right to step back, but also they were okay without me, which meant maybe I wasn't as essential as I'd believed. When she paused for breath, I asked her about her birthday, about the books, about school. Safe topics that let us connect without diving into painful waters. She told me about her teacher, about learning cursive, about how the craft kit I sent was perfect because Sophie loved making bracelets too, and now they could make matching ones. Then, inevitable as sunrise, she asked when I was coming to visit. When could she see me? When could I come to Oregon, or when could they come back home? Her voice got smaller with each question, younger, uncertain in a way that broke my heart. I told her the truth, or a version of it that a 7-year-old could understand. I told her that Grammy lived far away now, that visiting took planning and time, that grown-ups sometimes needed space to work through complicated feelings. I told her I loved her more than all the stars in the sky, that nothing would ever change that, but that sometimes love meant being patient and letting things heal properly. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if she'd done something wrong, if that's why I'd gone away. The question gutted me. I told her no, absolutely not, that she and James were perfect and wonderful, and this had nothing to do with them. That sometimes grown-ups made mistakes and had to fix them, and fixing them took time. She seemed to accept that, the way children do when they don't fully understand but trust the adult to handle it. She asked if she could call me again. I said yes, but not too often, maybe once a month. She negotiated like she always did. What about every 2 weeks? I smiled despite myself and agreed. Every other Sunday, 2 o'clock, 15 minutes. Before we hung up, she told me she missed me. That James missed me too. That Daddy seemed sad a lot. That Mommy was trying really hard to be better, though Emma didn't fully explain what better meant. I told her I missed her too, more than she could know. That I was proud of her for being brave in her new school. That I'd talk to her in 2 weeks. After I ended the call, I sat in my quiet living room and let myself cry. But these tears felt different than the ones I'd cried before. Less desperate. More bittersweet. The tears of someone grieving what was lost but also recognizing what remained. The bi-weekly calls became our routine. Emma, sometimes James too, though he was harder on the phone, easily distracted, more interested in showing me toys I couldn't see than in conversation. But hearing his little voice, his laugh, his "Love you, Grammy" in his imperfect pronunciation, it was enough. Not what I wanted, but enough to sustain me. Daniel and I texted more regularly too. Short exchanges, nothing heavy. Pictures of the kids. Updates on their lives. Occasionally, updates on his and Caroline's efforts to be better. Therapy continuing, parenting books being read, actual conversations happening about family and boundaries and respect. I stayed cautious. Warm but boundaried. Present but protected. It felt like walking a tightrope, this balance between love and self-preservation, but I was learning. Learning that I could care for people without sacrificing myself. Learning that my needs mattered too. Learning that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable people's worst behaviors. 4 months after they moved, Daniel asked if they could visit for Thanksgiving. Fly out for a long weekend, stay at a hotel, spend time together as a family. My first instinct was to say yes immediately, to throw the door wide open, to have them back in any capacity they'd allow. But I'd learned to pause before responding, to sit with requests, to check in with myself about what I actually wanted versus what old patterns told me I should want. I took 2 days to respond. When I did, I said yes, but with conditions. They could visit for 3 days. They'd stay in a hotel, not with me. My space was mine now, and I wasn't ready to give that up. We'd have meals together, activities with the kids, but also time apart. And if at any point I felt taken advantage of or disrespected, I'd say so immediately. And they'd honor that without argument. Daniel agreed to everything without hesitation. Said Caroline wanted to talk to me directly if I was willing, to apologize in person for her role in everything that happened. I agreed to that too, though the thought made me nervous. Caroline and I had never had an easy relationship. I'd always felt tolerated rather than welcomed, useful rather than valued. But maybe that was changing. Maybe therapy had given her tools I'd never had, language for things I'd only felt. Thanksgiving week arrived faster than I expected. I cleaned my house obsessively, then forced myself to stop. They weren't staying here, didn't need to see it, and I was falling into old patterns of trying to be perfect for them. I cooked some dishes to bring to our planned dinner, but didn't exhaust myself making everything. I bought modest gifts for the kids, but didn't go overboard trying to buy back their affection. When I picked them up at the airport, seeing them in person for the first time in months, I almost lost my composure. Emma ran to me and I caught her, holding tight, breathing in the scent of her hair. James was shyer, hanging back until Emma encouraged him, then throwing himself at my legs with his whole body. Daniel looked older, tired but lighter somehow, like he'd put down a weight he'd been carrying. Caroline looked nervous, her smile tentative, her eyes searching mine for cues about how to be. We had dinner that first night at a restaurant, neutral territory. The kids chattered nonstop, showing me drawings they'd brought, telling me stories I'd already heard on our phone calls but pretended were new. Daniel and Caroline were quieter, watching me, watching the kids, watching the dynamics carefully. The next morning, Caroline asked if we could talk privately. We went for coffee while Daniel took the kids to a children's museum. She apologized formally, thoroughly, with specifics that showed she'd actually thought about what she'd done wrong. She didn't make excuses, didn't blame her upbringing or her stress or anything else. She owned it. Said she'd been threatened by my relationship with her children, had seen my involvement as judgment of her mothering, had dealt with those feelings by trying to erase me rather than examining why I threatened her. She said therapy had helped her understand that my love for Emma and James didn't diminish her role, that there was enough love to go around, that she'd damaged her children by taking away someone who adored them because of her own insecurities. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I thanked her for the apology, told her I accepted it but that trust would take time to rebuild, that I needed to see sustained change, not just good intentions, that I wouldn't go back to being taken for granted or treated as disposable. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and said she understood, that she'd earn back my trust however long it took. The 3 days passed in a strange, careful dance. Moments of genuine joy, baking cookies with Emma, playing blocks with James, laughing at dinner with Daniel, but also moments of tension, of old patterns trying to reassert themselves, of me having to speak up when I felt boundary lines being tested. At the airport, saying goodbye, Emma cried. So did I. But this goodbye felt different. Not final. Not abandonment. Just distance, temporary, with the promise of reunion built in. On the drive home, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, hope. Not the desperate hope of before. The hope that required me to ignore reality and cling to fantasy. But realistic hope. Cautious hope. The hope that comes from seeing real effort, real change, real possibility. My house was quiet when I returned, but it didn't feel as empty as it once had. I made myself tea, sat in my favorite chair, and looked around at this life I'd been rebuilding. The book club schedule on my refrigerator. The volunteer shift reminder. The photos of the grandchildren alongside new photos, me and Ruth at dinner, the garden I'd started in spring, a sunset I'd captured on one of my walks. This was my life now. Not the life I'd planned, not the life I'd wanted, but a life nonetheless. A life with boundaries and dignity, with love that didn't require self-erasure, with relationships being rebuilt on healthier foundations. My phone buzzed. A photo from Daniel, the kids on the plane, holding a sign they'd made that said, "We love you, Grammy," with hearts drawn all around. I saved it to my album, smiled and sent back a heart emoji. Then I picked up my book and settled in for a quiet evening. Alone but not lonely, changed but not broken. Healing in my own time and on my own terms.